Welcome back. This is James Black at the Canadian Securities Exchange, and today I'm talking to Peter Krauth, author of The Great Silver Bull. Peter is the author of this best-selling book and the editor of the only silver-focused investment newsletters, Silver Stock Investor. We'll talk a bit more about that in the program today, and the Silver Advisor. Peter's been at VRIC with me this week, and Peter, you've seen obviously the same thing I've witnessed, which is a lot of foot traffic at the show. What is this telling you about what's happening in the silver space and commodity space in general?
Well, thanks for having me here, first of all. And you're right, the traffic is way up. Normally, that should be a sign to be cautious. However, we've been through multiple years of bear market, and it certainly is a welcome change. I do think that, based on the people I've spoken to and how they ask such great questions, they really do seem to be getting it and interested. And so I think this is a relatively sophisticated crowd, which tells me that we're closer to the beginning.
Right. Well, you said high traffic equals caution. I've heard that before, at PDACs and whatnot when it's really busy. Why is that?
People don't buy things that are hated. They buy things that are loved.
Yeah.
And silver at $116, $17 today is quite loved, especially if you look back just over the last couple of years and certainly way before that. But, I can speak to silver especially, but commodities in general are not that loved. The gold might be the exception. Gold has done very well over the last few years, above 5,000 today, which is tremendous. So, people just don't buy things that are hated. And so when prices have moved like this, you realize that the general investor, the broader investor has started to come into the market and is paying attention.
Right. So that's obviously driving some demand for and pushing up prices. Now we've seen a pretty steady climb over the last few months. Long-term outlook is probably the best place to start. Do you think, you said 117 per ounce, is that just a stop on the road to something much bigger, or are we going to park here for a while? Is there a floor? Where do we make our read here?
So, we can look at all of those angles.
Yeah.
Frankly, a floor, an absolute floor, I would say, is probably as low as, 35. If you look at what it costs to produce an ounce of silver, I'd be very surprised, shocked even that it would go below that. Now that we're at such high prices, that would be a pretty dramatic correction, and I personally don't think we're going to get that. I do think that we are due in the near term for some kind of balancing. Sentiment needs to rebalance. It's been a parabolic rise, not sustainable. And it also wreaks havoc on some of the industrial consumers of silver. They use quite a fair bit of silver. It varies. Some industrial consumers will use tiny amounts of silver, and they don't like it, but they're not that concerned because they can either absorb the cost for a little while or eventually pass it on, and it won't do much to the ultimate price of whatever they're producing.
Right.
But someone like solar panel manufacturers, for example, where at $30, $40 silver, it was already 20% of their overall cost. So this is getting concerning for them. And so they're looking at all kinds of things, thrifting, substitution, which is very difficult. We've heard about copper, for example, not as efficient, corrodes more quickly, not as reliable, and then they have to retool completely to start producing with a different metal. So I think that's a ways off. But and so we might see things like solar panels get more expensive and the sales start to slow down, but it's still the cheapest form of new energy. So it would be surprised that we would see, some kind of a significant hit to that part of the sector.
What about the relationship to gold prices? You mentioned some factors that would keep it, from being tethered to gold. EV demand, solar panels. Are there any other factors where we can start taking a new perspective that silver isn't just gold's, little cousin?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So industrial demand is a big deal. It's, just a few years ago, it was 50% of silver demand. Now it's 67% of silver demand. So I believe that what we're starting to see now to some extent is the investment side of silver. Silver's been money longer than gold has. It's been money for 5,000 years. Yeah. So if you rebalance and you consider what that means for the market, if you look at that proportion, with industrial demand taking on a larger and larger portion of silver demand, that doesn't mean investment demand has gone away. All it means is that there's less silver available for investment demand. So and I think this is what we've seen now, is that that's what has been driving this parabolic rise. People have come in to buy physical silver, and there's less available because the industrial consumers are soaking up so much of it. So if you have less available and demand comes in a big wave, well, the only option you have is price reaction, and that's what we've seen happen.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that a rebalancing would make sense. I've looked at how silver markets behave. Silver is very volatile. In the 2001 to 2011 bull market in silver, it went from $4 to $49 by April of 2011. In that time frame, we had 5 corrections of 15% or more. The average correction was 30%. So if we had that now, that would still only bring us to $75, close to $80. And there are plenty of opportunities which we can talk about.
Okay, you mentioned obviously the dynamics, but now as a consumer or an investor, I have a variety of ways I can expose myself to silver. I can go buy coins, bars. I can go buy stocks, whether they're intermediates, juniors, producers. I can even go into things like futures, derivatives. Where do you even start? Where do you even start thinking about buying and getting into silver exposure?
Start by buying my book.
Yeah, I don't want you to give up the secret sauce, but
absolutely happy to share all kinds of insights. But honestly, seriously, the book was written for that. It was to introduce people to the silver market and how it works, what the opportunities are, why it's important, why it's going to matter more and more as we go along, and how to get invested in it. And through the book, I explain that. In the newsletter, I obviously go into a lot more detail about that. But essentially, it's that I believe you can and should have exposure to the entire market. And that is everything from physical all the way down to, depending on your risk tolerance, but to some extent to the junior explorers. And you don't necessarily have to go to the highest risk stocks. I mean, some companies that I won't mention names today, but that are the largest publicly traded silver companies today. 2 of them did 15 times return in the 2000s. Yeah. So you don't have to take outsized risk to make good returns in this sector, and that's proof of it. So I think people just essentially need to slowly get involved, do some research, look into this a bit more, start by owning a little bit of physical. And then if you have the tolerance for the risk, start looking at, one great way is ETFs, because you can buy one thing on the market and you have instant diversification. You can even have one ETF that carries a portion of physical silver and the balance is silver mining stocks. Right. So it's like an instant exposure to the entire space. And these are great tools. I think people should take advantage of them. And then if you have the tolerance for it and the inclination, you can look at individual stocks as well.
Right. And now, plead ignorance, but do you take a lot of time looking at individual stocks and trying to make decisions on those?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's what my newsletter is all about.
Perfect. So then that leads me to my next question, which is when you are evaluating these opportunities, what's your inclination? Is it jurisdiction or is it management? What is your first?
So silver is very particular. It's unlike really any metal because one, it's a mix of both industrial and monetary. You really can't say that about to the same degree, at least as for silver, for any other metal. So already that is very different. And then it's a very small market. These numbers have changed because of the prices having changed and equity prices having moved so much. But as little as about maybe a month or so ago, the entire gold mining sector was just under $1 trillion. The entire silver mining sector was about $50 billion. Right. So 5% of the gold mining sector. And if you look at the physical metal, and that has changed again because of price recently. But even, a few months ago, the physical silver market was about 1/10 the size of the gold market. So what all of that means is that it's very particular in terms of when for me at least, when I make selections for stocks. You asked about how I choose them. So my first filter is actually, is there how much silver is in this company.
Right.
Because many of them will have silver in their name, but they're actually quoting you silver equivalents. So if you dig down a little bit, some of these companies are really lead, zinc, gold, copper miners that have a little bit of silver, but because they want to perhaps take advantage of, opportunities in silver, they'll have silver in their name when silver represents maybe 20% of the deposit,
Right, yeah.
or 20% of revenues from production. So my first filter is I look for ideally at least 40% of revenues or value in the ground from silver. And so after that, I'll look at jurisdiction. I'll look at management. I want to see, management has previous successes. Jurisdiction will play a fair influence to some degree. But I think you do have to have a certain risk tolerance because you don't find silver in all that many places.
Right.
So.
No, fair enough. And actually leads me to my next inquiry, which is, how do you create your worldview on silver every day? Is there particular sources or indicators in the market? Is there particular flows that you look at that educate you on where silver is going within intraday? Or, not to give again up the secret sauce.
That's fine. That's fine. But intraday, not so much.
Right.
I have a longer term view, and you have to.
Yeah.
Frankly, if you're willing to talk about, in the book, I say that my target ultimately is $300 silver, and that looked pretty crazy back then. And I wasn't doing it to be sensational. It was what I really thought, and I still think that we're going to see that. And some very credible analysts are now calling for even higher levels. But I didn't get to that number randomly. What I did was I looked at when silver peaked at $50 in 1980 for the first time, and looked at that price relative to other assets, relative to gold, relative to the Dow, relative to the average home price in the U.S. And what I did was I said, well, if we had, these ratios, it took so many ounces of silver to buy any of these other assets. If you project forward, where could that bring silver? They all pointed to about $300 for me. So again, it's not to be sensational, but I think that ultimately it could lead there. We're a third of the way, less than that now at today's prices. So I do still believe, and to be fair, I think that that's the kind of level we'll reach in some kind of a mania phase.
Right.
Not that we would get there and that it's sustainable, but that we could actually get to those kinds of levels. Other than that, I look at flows. One good way I feel is to look at the silver ETFs.
Yeah.
In the U.S., you've got the largest one, SLV, and then you've got multiple now around the world. India has developed many. China has developed silver ETFs. That's to hold and backed by physical silver. So what's interesting, what I've seen just lately, and that's with this parabolic rise, is that Asia has been driving the silver buying, at least on the investment side. If you look at global holdings of silver ETFs, they're now close to matching their all-time high of early, say, 2021 or so. But if you look at SLV, which is obviously held in the West and invested in mostly by Westerners, we're still a ways off. We're still about 20 or 30% below that 2021 high. So it tells me that we haven't participated that much yet. We haven't been driving the buying. And I speak to bullion dealers, for example,
right.
And they tell me that, and the ones in the West at least, and they're telling me that we're buying more silver than we're selling. So what that says is that people are looking at these prices and they're saying, oh, I'm going to unload. I bought this back at $30 or $40 and, $80, $70, $80, $90. I want to sell. I want to lock in some profits, or I want to get my money back. But the Asians are not thinking that way. And that tells me there's still lots of room for it to go.
Do you maybe see a shift of people going from gold into silver? It's just getting more buying value?
Yes, I believe that's driven it as well, because the ratio was way off. I believe it was April of 2024, perhaps later than that, actually. It peaked at, it would have been April this year, last year, 2025. It peaked at 105 to 1. So that means it took 105 silver ounces at the price at that time to buy 1 gold ounce. Today it takes less than 50.
Yeah.
So that has shrunk by half. Typically, when the ratio corrects like this, it actually overcorrects. So the average of, let's say, the last 20 or 25 years was about 55 or 60 ounces of silver to 1 of gold. So frankly, at 48 or so, I think it's got room to fall even farther. It doesn't mean, if you look at how the ratio works, it doesn't mean that silver has to rise. It could be that gold falls, which I don't necessarily expect either. But yeah, these things all point to this, not quite at these levels and not in the short term, but these overall, these higher silver prices are very sustainable.
Right. That's an optimistic way, I think, for us to conclude the conversation today, because I know there's, I think, going to be a lot of optimism heading through the end of VRIC and into PDAC. But as we know, we live in a pretty chaotic world at this point in time, so we don't really know. Just remind us, Peter, where should we keep up to speed with you and your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm active on Twitter. I'm active on LinkedIn, or now X rather than Twitter.
Yeah.
I have the book. If people are interested, they can find it on Amazon, The Great Silver Bull. And my newsletters are, as you mentioned, Silver Stock Investor, Silver Advisor. If you Google those, you will find them. And yeah, I mean, it's all about what I'm doing, and how I'm investing, and trying to be as careful as I can making my stock selection and sharing that.
Yeah, we're all just trying to predict the future as best as we can. Right?
That's right.
All right. Well, thanks again, Peter. This was James Black with the Canadian Securities Exchange. Another episode of the podcast here during VRIC. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you're viewing this for more great clips with great guests. So thanks again. Thanks again, Peter.
Pleasure.
All right.